Mr. Jubilee, sir, I believe you're moderating this session, so I'm going to hand over the proceedings very quickly to you.
Thank you, Kavya. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. I thank on behalf of all of us to Legal Era, Akriti and team for inviting us. Cross-border data transfer is a hot subject and still there is act has to come, but discussion has started from last 2 years. And this is a burning subject. And we let us see how within COVID time the cross-border data transfer happens. Now, without much debriefing on the subject, I would like to go to the experts because there are good esteemed panelists are there, and I will start with the Devansh first to set the context actually on the regulation front on the cross-border data. Devansh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Jubilee. Friends, data, which are facts or information used to make decisions, assumes an unexpected proportion in the virtual space. There it encompasses every digital transaction, every digital activity. Our discussion today is about the data in the virtual space. The Indian legal regime relating to data protection stands at an exciting juncture. From the stage of granting legal recognition to e-commerce in the year 2000, through the Information Technology Act, and subsequently recognizing the need of cybersecurity through the 2009 amendment to that act, it is now ready with its yet to be passed law to grant legal protection to personal data of the individual in the form of Data Protection Bill 2019. While the concept of personal data and sensitive personal data, did enter the Indian statutes in 2011 through the regulations passed under the Information Technology Act, the objective of the data protection law is to avoid any unexpected harmful consequence because of sharing of personal data. The idea is to keep intact privacy of every individual, which has been recognized by the Supreme Court as an integral facet of Article 21 in the Puttaswamy case. So very quickly, very briefly, let's look at some features of this data protection law. Now it recognizes two sets of data, personal data and sensitive personal data. While personal data is that data which can identify a person, if such data reveals information related to categories like, say, for example, health, finance, biometrics, sexual orientation, religious or political beliefs, or any other sort notified by the central government, it becomes the same data becomes sensitive personal data. The law intends to regulate how this personal data or sensitive data can be collected, recorded, stored, or disclosed or disseminated. These activities are collectively called processing. Thus, data transfer would also fall within the meaning of processing. Now, in this business, friends, of data sharing, the law seeks to recognize the following actors. There are three actors here. The giver of the data will be a data principal. The receiver of the data will be a data fiduciary. Obviously, the data principal would be a natural person. The fiduciary, the data fiduciary, or the data processor could be the state or any juristic entity. It will be the job of the data fiduciary to spell out the purpose of obtaining the data. The person who would process the data on behalf of the fiduciary will be data processor. While the fiduciary can engage another person, that is the data processor, it must be done with a written contract. The role ascribed to these actors is of trust. So at the time of processing this data, the law will impose the obligation to act fairly and reasonably and avoid compromising the privacy of the data giver. Maintaining the accuracy and completeness of data is also the responsibility of the data fiduciary. Further, the data can only be processed for the purpose consented and used for such purpose, which the data principal reasonably expects. Only under certain specified circumstances like employer-employee relations or for saving the interest of data principal, data may be processed without consent. Now, Ankit will cover this topic in some detail as we progress through the panel discussion. But the statute, in order to achieve the common platform of consent and fair use between data fiduciary, data principal, and data processor, imposes upon the data fiduciary the obligation to give notice stating the objective of collection and dissemination of data. It must apprise the individual, which is the data principal, about the retention policy of the data. It mandates the data fiduciary to prepare a policy, a privacy policy, which is called privacy by design policy, where it must set out the policy steps that each data principal will take to protect individual policy. It mandates them to use appropriate security protocols. It recognizes a category called significant data fiduciary, which are different from intermediary. They are required to undertake data protection impact assessment before processing the data. And they must have a data protection officer to ensure compliance of these mandates. The statute also grants data principals the right to obtain detail about the about the processing and to know where the data has been shared for what purpose. It also grants individual right to be forgotten. It renders data fiduciary duty bound to report data breaches. It provides a separate regime for personal data of children. It provides for sandboxing to encourage innovation. Now, in relation to the regime of cross-border data transfer, the position simply put, and this can be discussed as the panel progresses, is that sensitive personal data may be transferred but has to be stored locally. And this transfer of sensitive personal data is permissible only with a contractual arrangement and upon assessment of the GDPR adequacy principle. But critical personal data, which will be as specified by the central government, can only be processed in India, which means the principle of data localization is applicable to critical personal data. Limitedly, in a limited way, it is applicable to sensitive data, but it is not at all applicable to personal data which does not fall in the category of sensitive data. Now, friends, there is no doubt that the law is attempting to seek a balance of various interests, and those are promotion of digital economy and individual privacy. But now COVID has led to global imbalance. It has forced people to take to technology irrespective of their preparedness. It has forced people to take decisions about data sharing in the virtual space. I would not be surprised if a large part of consents for data sharing would fall in the category of imperfect decision making. The extent of individual privacy that has already been compromised would take some time to emerge. Thus, the idea of consent and reasonable expectation under the existing bill will have to be reviewed. Then there are other economic factors which would impact many commercial considerations. And to briefly put, and I just want to flag this, which can be discussed, which is first at both levels, the ability of a big company now to make themselves compliant with the new law as and when it is passed, and the ability of a startup to raise capital to put all these policies in place. You know, friends, therefore, while the law stands the way it does, while the law is a law with a noble intention, with good intention, perhaps the challenges that we face now, and with the number of people who are already digitally engaged, the ideas within this law will lead to will lead to a lot of debate and disputes, because everyone's reasonable expectation and ideas of harm are never going to be on an even platform. Therefore, at this juncture, this I think is a primary challenge. And with this broad overview, I just feel that we can take up the topics further and see and try and address issues as and when they arise in course of the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Devan, uh, for setting the tone. I would like to go to Ankit actually on the building on this, what the framework Devansh has specified. Are there any practical aspects which you would like to highlight on the cross-border data transfer in the regulatory side?
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Atul sir, and thank you to the entire concept transfer in terms. Now, of data, concept revolves how we define, then further we categorical sensitive norms of GDP, how we categorize. 2011, just as to how they can do that. Actually, in India, when we are talking perspective that what happens in a cross transaction, is there a definition or is there a global approach which get all nations to a platform of data anonymity? How when data is generated, the important aspect is consent. Is that an express consent of an individual processor? Anyone, it could be anyone. In the same tone, when we are talking from a consent, our section 14 of the Indian Contract talks about a consent. Similarly, GDPR is specific on the term consent. Unfortunately, the PDP bill right now doesn't talk much of a consent as to how do we monitor the consent and how do we withdraw. The problem which is existing is the data which is in anonymized form. Can a
I think he has a challenge on the Wi-Fi. We can. Yes. Ankit, you have, I think, challenge of Wi-Fi. Now,
oh,
yeah, now you look better. Can you continue, please?
yeah. So I am not sure where I was, but on the I was mentioning about the specific thing about the consent under which the laws have remained pretty much silent post 2011 till 2018 when Justice Sri Krishna came with the report. However, the law on the consent is yet to be codified in India. Without this consent, it is difficult for anonymized data to go out of India. And specifically with the target audience of less than 18, which have a higher mass and internet penetration within India, the modification of the term consent is something which we have to look at very critically. Like, for example, a lot of apps which have access to personal data have users which are less than 18. Are these eligible to give consent? Are these apps eligible to give consent as even as the
I think we
data?
continue because yeah, we are losing him. Yeah, Ankit, you were talking about the consent of the particularly below 18, which is a problem in India. I agree with you.
Yes,
Yeah, because many
yes,
even
sir.
the social media users are many in India, but there are majority minors who have joined this with the birth exchange and all. But that will not be possible when the particularly Data Protection Act comes and all. So yeah, continue. You can if you want to. 2 more minutes, Ankit. Okay, I think there is a problem with his yeah connection. So let's move to from the regulations and the reality. Let's move to the realities. And I would like to ask John, what are the particularly industry experience on the practicalities? Because regulation we
I think Atul has a problem in his connection. he's drawing up. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I'll start. I may mute myself if I have some background noise occasionally for about 20 to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'll start. Thanks, Atul. I heard the brief introduction, so I'll start with an industry perspective. How I thought I'll go about it is like this. There are certain myths. I may be saying the same thing which Devansh said and Ankit said, but maybe from a slightly contrarian point of view, but again, driving the same point. There are a couple of myths. I will give an industry perspective by stating two myths about data regulations and data privacy regulations. And probably why these myths are only myths and the reasoning for that. And in doing that, I probably will be able to establish how, as a in-house counsel, I look at it, and how, as an industrial company counsel. When I say industrial company, I consider the likes of GE, ABB, Philips. These are industrial companies. How an industrial company looks at it as opposed to a consumer company, which collects a lot of data from consumers directly. Yeah. So myth one is this myth that this data privacy regulations have a sweeping effect on all kinds of data. If you have attended iTech Law before, or if you have attended any of these conferences, partly firm-driven, there is a paranoia about data privacy regulations changing everything related to data in India. And this is, in my opinion, a myth. And I say that for two reasons. I mean, if you pull out a couple of key concepts in data privacy, which Devansh initially spoke about and Ankit spoke about, it becomes obvious that it applies to a class of data. I'm of course going to draw from GDPR because that's the only legislation which everybody is drawing from, and Indian legislations have also drawn from that, and these are the fundamental principles on which we will ride even when the legislation comes into effect. And I'm going to pick on two subjects. One is personally identifiable information and the concept of the data subject itself, and I'll give some examples also there. Devansh initially talked about personally identifiable data, and not all data is personally identifiable. So it's pretty obvious that for an industrial company like a GE or an ABB or a Philips, large chunk of our data is actually industrial data. And what is industrial data? For example, if a flight is in air, about 1 terabyte of data comes out of each flight from the sensors. And what we do at the back end here in Bangalore is it is analyzed to see whether the flight needs maintenance or not. These days we have moved on to something called predictive maintenance, where instead of prescribing, if you had a car, you say your car has to be serviced at every 10,000 kilometers. Here, the sensors predict the conditions in which your aircraft engine was used, and accordingly do some data analytics at the back using that data which the flight throws out. So none of this is actually personally identifiable data or sensitive personal data, and so on and so forth. So large chunk of the industrial world is outside the ambit of data privacy regulations, especially if one concentrates on the definition of personally identifiable data. And this data, almost all data privacy regulations in the world have this concept of personally identifiable data. They may change in terms of nomenclature, but worldwide that has been the trend. They proceed by establishing what is personally identifiable data and thereby protected itself. The second concept is the concept of the data subject, which I had a lot of pressure from my European colleagues to ensure that GDPR regime is implemented in India. And I was of the opinion that it doesn't apply to me. because of how we operate as GE, we don't do much back office work, processing payroll data and those kind of things. But we are an industrial company. We do a lot of research for global counterparts in India. We do a lot of sales for global counterparts in India. So that's what we do. And hence the concept of data subject was under a lot of discussion. And what we found at that point, and extensive discussions with Slaughter and May. Slaughter and May is a UK-based firm, is that if one understands the concept of data subject very clearly, a lot of data privacy regulations may not be applicable to an industrial company as such. And I'll expand a little bit more in the context of GDPR. Again, all the other legislations have borrowed from GDPR. If you take the concept of data subject in GDPR gives protection to the data of a data subject. Now, people normally think a European citizen is who is protected by GDPR, which is not the case. GDPR protects the data of a data subject. Now, if I, an Indian national, I am in Europe and they are collecting my data, it is highly likely that I am a data subject whose data they collect is protected under GDPR. I don't have to be a EU citizen to be for my data to be protected. The next is, if a EU citizen, let's take the example of a EU citizen who steps out of the EU and comes to, let's say, Delhi. He checks into a hotel collects his or her information. It is not necessary that he is a EU data subject for GDPR to become applicable to that EU citizen. It may be, but it is not necessary. We will go into a little more detail on the examples in a short while. So I'll take a few examples. Let's say there is an Indian florist who delivers for data subjects in the EU, but they actually deliver in India. So if an Indian florist is actually targeting a EU data subject, then GDPR has an extraterritorial jurisdiction, and GDPR becomes applicable to that Indian organization to the extent that, of course, enforceability in Europe and so on and so forth is a question. But GDPR says we are applicable to you. But let's say it was a situation where it was a delivery service of flowers in India for Indian audience primarily to get flowers delivered in India. I am a European citizen. I sit in Europe. I look up this website and I say, oh, I have a relative in India. It's their birthday. I want to send some flowers. And I go make an order on that website. But as long as this website is not targeting me while I'm sitting in Europe, I'm not a data subject within the ambit of that particular organization for GDPR to become applicable while I'm a customer of that particular florist. A little roundabout, but long and short is understanding this concept of data subject. Just because someone is a EU citizen or a citizen of some other country where there is a different data privacy regime, it does not necessarily mean that one is a data subject to whom that country's data privacy regulations apply. So this also puts a lot of data privacy regulation outside the ambit of being applicable to me. So again, as I started off, a slightly contrarian point of view, there is this sweeping view that all data is governed by data privacy regulations. But if you very clearly understand these concepts of personally identifiable data as well as the concept of a data subject, it can be seen that a lot of classes of data can be moved outside the ambit of most data privacy regulations, especially if you are an industrial company, especially if you are a business to business enterprise. Yeah. I will just touch upon one more myth in India, which Devansh also talked about when he opened his note. The myth too is data privacy regulations in India is still being drafted. Okay. Everyone thinks Justice Sri Krishna drafted it and it is still not passed, and hence there is no law. But there is actually a extensive set of regulations around sensitive personal data coming from Information Technology Act, as well as the Information Technology, the Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures around Sensitive Personal Data Rules 2011. Yeah. So if you go into the detail of these legislations, of course, they're not as detailed as the current data privacy regulations, but major concepts have already been touched upon. The concept of a personally identifiable information, sensitive personal data, these concepts are already touched upon. And what a company should do to be compliant with these things is already stated here. So if you take section 4 of these rules, section 4 says you have to have a privacy policy and you have to publish it on your website for everybody to be able to see. So that's already there. If you're collecting personal information or sensitive personal information, it also says you need the consent. So the concept of consent is also already there. These rules also say that every company must have a grievance officer for any sort of data breaches and data related complaints, and those grievance officers must be published. The names of those grievance officers must be published in their privacy policy. So most of these concepts are touched upon by the existing regulation. We are building upon an existing body of knowledge which is already there, of course, dispersed over these multiple rules and regulations and so on and so forth. We are addressing it more holistically now. So to wrap up, myth 1, data privacy regulations have a sweeping effect on all kinds of data. If one understands the concept of personally identifiable information or sensitive personal data, as well as the concept of a data subject, it is possible that a whole class of data moves outside of the ambit of applicability. Myth 2, data privacy regulations do exist in India, and it does exist in a pretty detailed form. And it's of course to be gathered from different legislations like IT Act and rules, IT rules and so on and so forth. But these do exist today, and there is a compliance requirement today. Enforcement may be a bit on the lax side, but these regulations do exist today. So yeah, so on that note, Atul, over to you, and that's the industry perspective. And I feel as an in-house counsel, very often the case is that I only need to know what the law says. I am willing to be compliant with the law. I am not worried about compliance. Most often in most forums I sit, there is a lot of hue and cry on how unclear the law is. That, of course, is a concern. If they define data in such a way that unnecessarily there is an ambiguity and industrial data also becomes data governed by any data privacy regulations, yes, we do have an issue. But otherwise, whatever drafts are out there, whatever compliance requirements are out there, we don't, as an organization, find it difficult to comply with them. We are more than willing to comply with them as long as it is clearly stated what the requirement is. So with that, Atul, thank you.
Thank you, Ankit. I think we had the connection stability issue, but now we can bank with Samir. And Samir, actually, I would like to ask you, because you deal with a lot of data. So how do you manage this? Because see, what Ankit said, John said, is actually right, that the industrial companies, I also belong to industrial companies. So for them, the compliances are less. So awareness has been already done, but at the same time, compliances are less. So how do you deal with so much data, and how do you practically handle particularly cross-border issues?
Sure. No, thank you, Atul. And I think kind of clearly Devansh and Ankit did, and John did put a very nice perspective to the entire piece. I think let me give you a slightly before I get really into the practical aspect or a telco perspective. I just wanted to touch about a few things which are more kind of views that I thought kind of are important. Completely agree with what John said. I think there are laws that are out there. There's no doubt on that. These laws are there. Obviously, they are dated, and I think that's a piece everybody knows. Unfortunately for us, as a country, we've not been able to really keep up with the pace. Where the technology has gone ahead and really kind of taken pace. It's changed. It's changing every minute, every day. The laws are still pretty old comparatively, and therefore kind of we really need to do a lot of catching up. But having said that, let me put a very simple perspective to this. If you look at it from the perspective, what is it that we are really talking or worried about? We are really worried about is some data that belongs to me, and can that really get misused? Now, if you really sum up the problem is just that much. But the solution to that is probably not that small. It'll have to be a much bigger thing, because the same set of rules or the same set of solutions can't probably apply to every single industry or every single piece. And that's where I think to your point and to your question, that in an industrial company, clearly the amount of data that is being used, or the amount of data that really gets seen, is far lesser versus, say, a telco, or, say, for example, any IT company or a technology company, which really has a whole lot of its own apps, etc. To give you a classic example, I mean, Google's valuation is pretty much based on the data that it has. I don't think it provides anything else out there. What it really provides is what the world anyway knows, and it's just the entire data that it kind of turns around and holds, which is really driving the valuation up. So having said that, I think kind of let me just first step into and say, from a telecom perspective, what the law is really. So obviously the IT Act, the data privacy rules, all of that apply. There's no doubt on that. I mean, we are not different. In addition to that, there are some parts to it given in the Telegraph Act, as well as the license that the TOT issues. The Telegraph Act, of course, as all of you would know, is a very, very old act. I mean, it probably needs a lot more change, because from where it used to be and from where it is today, it's the world has changed. I mean, obviously it was drafted and put in place from the perspective when the old telegraphs were sent by bits and bytes, and there was the Morse code and all of that. And of course, telephone was still probably in its it probably got discovered much later. But the fact is that if you look at it from the perspective of a telco, and the Act actually provides for clauses or requirements which are still around the fact that how a telephone exchange or a telephone operator really operates, which is to really say that messages, or for that matter calls, how they are intercepted, if at all they need to be intercepted. Somebody who's responsible to intercept and is responsible to make sure that it is correct and it is not being distorted, it puts certain obligations on them. Does that really reflect the position of what, as a telco today, which is really dealing in apps and data and kind of the amount of subscribers, all of that really do? The answer is no. That's where I think the license has come in. The license does turn around and provide certain more things, and then those really are around the whole ensuring of the data privacy and of the communication first. So it's divided into two parts. There's a data privacy of the communication, which is that if two people are talking or two people are exchanging messages, how do you ensure the data privacy of that particular communication, which further links back into the various things of what the license holder can turn around and do with that data, how he manages the data, how he gives access to the government for the interception, etc. Those are really the provisions. The next part really, and it goes back to the data privacy rules, regulations, all of that, and part of the license, is that how do I deal with and what can I do with the data that I have access to for a customer? I think that's where it is. And any personal or sensitive data clearly cannot be used by me for any other purpose except for providing the service to that person itself. And any data cannot be misused or given out, etc., without the consent. I think if you look at it from that perspective, now take the broader horizon. There used to be phone calls, and now there is obviously the apps, and you've got the data moving around, in the sense you've got 4G, you got how kind of the information flies around very quickly. emails going up and down, etc. Now, all of that needs certain types of equipment, needs certain type of specifications. The government has prescribed all of those pieces, and that kind of remains. The other piece is all the records, etc., that need to be maintained. So current regulation requires me to maintain, the call data records and all the other pieces for about a year. That's the thing, for at least a year. There are practices that go on within the industry. It's not written, it's not required, but that there are times that you keep call records for much later period. And that's more because it comes in handy during investigations, etc. I mean, we've all seen this in the newspaper. We see this very often. Call data records are sought. A lot of things come out. I mean, one of the classic cases that probably relied on call data records to really get resolved was the entire Sheena Bora murder case. I mean, that was a classic case. Even in the current situation, when you see what's going on in the news, there is the WhatsApp chats and all of that's coming out, and things change from there. Now, the point therefore comes is that I, as a company, and this as an industry, telco industry or the digital industry, or for that matter apps, etc., there is a whole lot of information that now we get or the apps get. Telcos, for that matter, I've just split this between the two. Telcos, very clearly, only for the purpose of providing services. It's absolutely clear we get data. Those data are put in a CAF form, as we call it, which is what everybody fills in to take a connection. That data is, of course, stored in a secure environment. That data is not shared with anybody. In fact, there are more rules, there are more processes that have been put in, including the fact that if my wife wants to call up and seek information about me, we will not be able to give that. It'll have to be done from me. It'll have to come from my registered email. I'll have to show up a ID proof, and all of that piece happens. Any changes that I want can only be done in particular manners and can't be done, just by anybody walking into the store. Has that curtailed fraud? The answer is no. Frauds do happen, but that's, I think, kind of, I would say, a very small part. And that is where technology continues to evolve, and that's why the processes continue to evolve. From a telco perspective, that's what you got to do. Only way that the data can be shared is provided there is a consent that is taken from the customer or the subscriber. That consent also only pretty much comes in handy if there is a government requirement of validating, or when they do their own number crunching, etc. But other than that, this data can't get used by anybody outside. Pretty much, there are companies that call about data analytics, but none of the personal or the private sensitive data gets dealt with over there. Coming to the apps, and I think that's where my bigger concern is, because now if you look at apps, they pretty much take every single piece of information from you, including credit cards and, kind of backups and safety questions and, kind of various other things, and passport details sometimes, and sometimes, kind of driving license details, etc., all of that. I think, again, how do you protect that is a big question. And again, from their perspective, they are also bound by the same laws and rules and regulations. Is the data getting sold? My suspicion is yes, probably. And this has nothing to do with the organization. It's more my personal view. Probably yes. Because clearly, I've seen that very often. You turn around and go into a app, and 5 minutes later, you'll get an advertisement, what you would have probably seen. You try going to Google, try finding a flight. 3 minutes later, you will get somebody pinging you saying there's a flight option here. Clearly, they are looking at it. They are doing it. There are tie-ups at the back end, etc. that happen. I think the question that kind of we as industry, as lawmakers, as regulators, as people who are responsible, I think the question we need to really ask is the kind of requirement we need from a data privacy perspective versus the reality. I think the one thing we keep talking about, the law needs to say X, Y, Z, but we forget the fact that in this today's day and age in the real world, there is nothing called privacy, to be very honest, in my view. My personal view is once you are on a mobile, once you have started to download apps, you are pretty much public. I mean, let's take Facebook, let's take WhatsApp, let's take Google. This data remains there. It is not going away. It's not as if you put something, only you can access it. Somewhere or the other, it will come. I mean, and I've tried this several times. You go onto the net, you just turn around and type a name. Suddenly, all the information that's available on a person comes in, right? There'll be photos that come in. There'll be things that will come in, the past, the history, all of that. So I think the larger concern from a cross-border data transfer now is how do you control misuse of the data? That's one. Two, cross-border data will happen. Cross-border transfer of data will happen. It's a given. I mean, in a boundaryless world where companies are operating, really virtually, we are all a classic case of look at COVID, right? Because of COVID, we are doing a conference which otherwise for donkey's years we've all been dressing up and going there and kind of sitting on stages and talking, doing the interaction. We're all doing this virtually. All of this is there. So the fact is that data will move. Laws need to enable companies to turn around and make sure that they can do what is required strictly to ensure loss or misuse. At the same time, customers need to be very clear that their information is out there. They need to be careful of sharing what they want for it to be out there. If there is stuff that they feel should not go there, don't share it. So I think that's really where it is now. All companies definitely need to comply. Those laws exist. Telcos do comply. We are under strict guidelines. We are under strict compliance from the DOT itself. And unlike an unregulated industry, a regulated industry has even more stricter compliances and penalties. So I think from that perspective, whether it's cross-border data in COVID times or otherwise, I think the issues remain the same. The practical aspects need to be seen. The laws definitely must do a very quick catch-up and should also be looking at the future of how things will evolve. So back to you, Atul.
Yeah. Thank you, Samir. Actually, you made it a right point that misuse of the data is a major concern, and whether we can practically stop it, that's the question. Rather than this all protection and all, that's okay. And then whether we use the data for which it is collected.
Yeah.
With this, actually, I would like to move to Anand, and I wanted to ask Anand, in cross-border, data localization was a big subject. So can you throw light on that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Atul, and thank you, Samir, for that detailed insights. John, I really appreciate the way you have described about the organizations, how they handle, and the kickoff by Devansh and Ankit over there. So I'll try to answer this question more from a privacy operations perspective, right? So we have around 137 privacy and data protection laws plus 50 more laws to yet to come from a global perspective, right? Which will definitely talk about how one should handle data, specifically the personal data, which also includes sensitive personal data here. Now, one of the key thing to understand is that every organization needs to build a robust framework to process the data. And when I say process the data, I would say the entire data life cycle, right from data collection to its processing, securing, storing, transferring, disclosing, and then probably deleting that data. So that is the data life cycle I'm talking about. And then moving on from there, once they have that particular data, there are something like tools or like Samir just now said about the applications which enable the processing. Now, if you look at COVID, the entire scenario has changed. Earlier, you were in office, no need for so many internet connections dedicatedly connecting to a server. Not that kind of a technology was getting used earlier. You were in a secure environment for processing such sensitive data, and all of a sudden, you are at home, right? So organizations needed to go back to the blackboard and identify what is the impact of this pandemic on the processing front from a business continuity perspective or a disaster perspective, right? If something shuts down because of the lot of traffic or heavy traffic, how are we going to come back on track? That is one. Second thing which came to the light was how do we handle our vendors? How do we give them our access? Right. So these are something which is very particularly, and the most important part which were getting discussed earlier about data subjects or the end consumers. How do we keep the transparency in our operations so that there is no issue? Now let me touch upon the two specific. I'll narrow down my discussion to two important points, which are health data as well as your financial data. If you look at COVID, the health data I mean, the hospitals, blood banks, government organizations, they have collected a huge amount of, I mean, it is in billions, you can call it as of today, right? Who knows how to store this data? Do we have a proper governance framework for that data? Who has access to that data? Now, one of the exception to the privacy that government can take ask for such data at any point of time because this is a pandemic, and they would like to publish certain statistics worldwide with respect to number of deaths, number of infected patients. But at the time of collection, if you read all the news articles, you will see all the complaints made by news channels or newspaper agencies, which says there is no robust process of data collection or to record the deaths over there. Now, this is something which is a people aspect coming into this picture. Now, coming back to that localization aspect, as of now, health data is not required to be localized. But if you look at RBI, all the financial data which is getting processed, that needs to be localized. Now, in this localization, now there are two contradictions, right? If you look at RBI says, oh, you can save a copy at a local end. But if you look at the PDPV provision, I know it's still a bill, but if you look at that provision, it says that data should be deleted within 24 hours, right? So there are still contradictions going on. If you look at the analytics part, if you look at the intelligence part, how these new tools or new IT activities are supporting us from a technology perspective to get over the right metrics to help us to make an informed decision, the data is required to be shared. Now, I have come across one of very fantastic situation where a patient is admitted in one of the hospital. He's infected with COVID, and the doctors or the hospital are not informing him whether he is infected or not. They are reaching to municipal corporation to first inform them. I mean, like, I guess John and Samir was saying, I'm a data subject. Don't I have right to figure out whether I'm infected or not infected? Don't I have right to control my data where it is going? But again, hospital says, hey, this is a pandemic and this is our obligation. We have to go and report this. So nobody is stopping them from reporting. But coming back to the point, how you are informed, how you are keeping the transparency with the data subject. The second aspect in this entire localization or data management or data governance, I would say, is the security. People are working from home. That's the biggest scare what most of the organization had, because other than big organization, I don't know whether everybody had a practice to allow people to go at home and work from there in some emergency cases. So how to control that data? The leakage aspect I'm talking about for the breach, the trigger for the breach. So that risk assessment with respect to that data is also something which was required. Some people moved from a traditional model that everything to be set on premises. They went on a cloud because COVID was there, work from home requirement was there, and all these things. Was there a kind of an assessment when we moved? Even for government organizations also, when they move to a particular cloud, have they done a kind of an assessment that, I'm putting the health data on this particular cloud, right? Is this cloud safe enough? Do I have appropriate controls on that cloud? Because if you look at the overall statistics which are coming by from the government side, majority of the phishing attacks, majority of the social engineering attacks, or say ransomware attacks, are happening in the COVID time because there is no control, or there is, I would say, hardly a little control on it. So this is something which is very, very important. And trust me, like Samir said, I agree to him holistically that uh, you cannot stop transfer of data. Data has become a commodity. Few people call it as a oil, but if you take that analogy that it is a oil, technology is the, I would say the device for commute. If that oil is not provided to a device to commute, it will not travel, right? It will not give you the desired result. You will not be able to achieve the objective. So restricting that data, right, will have some very, very important drawbacks, right? I understand that, national security concern is there, emergency response is there, innovation for startups is there. Recently there was a new framework which is planned to come, non-personal data, where you're supposed to anonymize the sensitive personal data or personal data in such a manner that there is no identifier, and still you can use that data. I'm sure some of the companies have already started using such things, but then data cannot be stopped from traveling outside, right? Whether it is personal, sensitive, personal, but how do we do that? That is something most important. Data localization requirement is exclusively a requirement specifically from RBI, which is for the specific transaction data, sensitive transaction data like a financial transactions. So that is something which is very important to look at, and I hope that that in the coming future, when the PDPB comes in, that time at least we will have an overarching framework which is equivalent to GDPR, because that is the highest level of protection as of today, or maybe more than that coming into picture. That's what I would say, Atul, here. Thanks.
Thank you, Anand. Actually, you have covered well the aspect of data localization. I checked. Actually, there are no questions, at least as of now, in the chat box from the audience. So I would like to come back to each one of you for one point of the. Yeah, I think Kavya has come with the time up. So Kavya, just give us 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes. So with 10 seconds to each one of you, we make 1 point for the audience for the cross-border data transfer? 1 point only. So with Devansh, actually, we move Devansh, Ankit, same way we. Devansh, I think you will have to unmute.
Yes. My quick point is that personal data, the consent which has been and the way we are giving consent for sharing the data, in my view, with the way things are today, will and the legislation which is yet to come, which is the law which will substantially deal with the aspect of personal data and sensitive personal data. I think till the law catches up, it is a mutual responsibility of the future data principle and the fiduciary to watch out their own interests and protect their own what is integral to them, personal data, because there is enough scope in the law which will lead to future debates about intention of sharing and misuse, and all these things will be tested post facto by the time the law catches up. So I think it's a stage of mutual personal responsibility, personal data, for both data fiduciary and data principle.
Thank you. Ankit, your 1 point.
Sure. I would suggest that if some kind of clearing house or a single point data clearing house be set up under the aegis of PPP model, not a completely government, but in terms of a PPP model, which act like a custodian of what data goes out of the country till the time regulatory clearances are happening. So that would be my 1 cent on the policy side.
Thank you. Actually, thank you, Ankit. Actually, Samir, one question has come, and let us talk about that question. Would establishing data centers in India help to curb misuse and other violations, safety issues related to cross-border data transfer? So we take that question and maybe we can close. So Samir, Anand, do you want me to repeat? Do you want me to repeat the question?
I can see the question. I think
Perfect.
data centers in India absolutely is a good idea. The data center in India is a growing business. It is not as prevalent, or rather, it's not as big as it is in some of the other countries. Definitely, to the extent if there are data centers that are here and are involved in processing data which belongs to the Indian consumers or the public here, definitely will allow or will help in reducing the kind of information that goes out, for sure. However, that also will depend on whether the entity that is the data center, where is it owned, how is it owned, and what are they really wanting to do. So the fact is that it is better. Yes, you will have the data center operating in India, and catering to requirements here. But will that 100% guarantee the data is not moving out? It probably will. So to that extent, I don't think it matters really, except to the fact that if there is, at least there is some control and some fear of or requirement to comply with the applicable and extant laws when an entity is based here and is carrying out operations here.
Yeah. So my 1 cent on that is, when the data centers are established in India, typically government would be the most happy agency because they will have access to the data, and that way the litigations which are there, that will smoothly proceed. That's one aspect. Secondly, if you look at the data centers, they have a standard global certifications from a security standpoint, which are SSA 16, SSA 18 certification, depending upon the data getting processed or getting stored over there. The specific controls are applied, like level of encryption, access controls, physical access controls, all these things. And the third point is something where the frameworks like NIST framework you have, or the PCI DSS framework you have, or the HIPAA framework you have, I think those will apply specifically to it. So that will not dynamically change if the data is still stored in India. I mean, the threat would depend on the intelligence and the vulnerabilities which will be kept open by the data center people for the purpose of the attacker, and how the attacker is going to encash that thing.
Yeah, agree. John, I'm coming back to you because you left. You have 10 seconds.
Sure. Yeah. So it's commendable the spirit in which our data privacy regulations are addressing concerns around sensitive data and personal data and sensitive personal data. But as a country, as a nation, we are a nation enabling the world with IT and IT-enabled services. And to that extent, if we create a paranoia around data and dealing with data, it can have a negative impact on the nation itself. So hence, it's important that we tread this line very cautiously.
Perfect. Thank you very much.